It was a new ship, filled with new knickknacks and quality of life features. I was sure that it was just some small failure. Not right? I maniacally flipped through the pages and found
Alright.
Tales from the Underhive. Talk is the lifeblood of
Underhive.
the Downhive. Guilders spread the word of lucky finds, new tunnels or ore strikes out in the bad zones. In the drinking holes of Dust Falls, 2 tunnels and a dozen other settlements, the latest rumours and discoveries dominate the conversation. When new news is thin, the talk turns to old news. In the Underhive, a man's fame lasts as long. In the White Wastes by Glory Hole.
Alright.
There were 3 of them, a tall man
Right.
and a
So
daughter
whatever
of some
just
15
happened.
or 16 years. Together they dug out a small shelter in the soft hive dust,
It just fixed itself. for
built a
some
water
whatever
still
reason.
beside it, and made a big slime pit, which was soon brimming with a mass of bubbling green stuff. For some months there was no word of the Veloy, until one day a lone Jew staggered into Glory Hole from the White Waste. He was cut to ribbons and had lost a lot of blood. The youngster was delirious with thirst, and there was no sense to be had of his ravings. The only words he would say were, "The devil, Veloy. The devil, Veloy," which he would repeat over and over again, like a ward against an evil spell. For days the Jew lay in a haunted fever, sometimes calling upon imaginary companions or raving at some illusionary enemy. Once his screaming became particularly agitated, so that it rang out in the street, "The devil Veloy! The devil Veloy!" Passers-by heard the screaming and some recognised the name of the settler family. One man seemed particularly affected by these cries. He had the pale, almost white skin and hairless scalp of House Delac. The man knelt beside the youth, a pallid figure in black, and whispered to him in such a way that none could hear his words. The Jew calmed at once and soon lapsed into deep sleep. The Jew's mysterious behaviour set people wondering what had become of the Delac settlers called Veloy. Surprisingly, no one had heard anything of them since their departure. They hadn't returned to Glory Hole, nor had any guilder passed the way to trade. One of the guilders, a man called Aslo, said he was taking a slave train through the wastes the next day and offered to call in on the Veloy's hole if anyone cared to accompany him. Of course, Aslo was angling for cheap protection because he didn't want to go anywhere near the Veloy place alone. By dawn the next day, Glory Hole was in uproar. The Jew had suddenly woken, sat upright with an unnatural jolt, cried out one final time, and inexplicably died. The stranger who had spoken to him the day before was nowhere to be found. The guards at the gate reported that a Delac had passed through the previous evening. With him was a hunchback who no one recalled seeing before, and a rat-skinned woman called Hotis, who sat in Hagen's hole and told fortunes for a few trader tokens. A deputation of guilders led as many as half a dozen gangs to Veloy's hole. The wastes were quiet all around, and the white ash itself seemed oddly still. The entrance to the hole was locked and solid, fastened from the inside, designed to keep out the fierce ash storms and predatory renegades. The gangers broke through using a thermal mine. One of the leaders, a Goliath called Brack, went down the crude ladder into the hole. The shack was lit, and in the hole there were the usual signs of occupation. A meal of slime cobs lay waiting upon the burner. Outdoor clothes and boots sat in the entranceway. There was nothing out of the ordinary in the hole except for one room. A room stacked high with weapons and ammunition, with water bottles and belts, bands and bracelets, rings and countless small pieces of bric-a-brac. And here and there, amongst the glittering pile, it was possible to recognise a familiar weapon or charm, the possession of some gang fighter known in Glory Hole. Of the Valois themselves, the searchers found nothing. There was no sign of a struggle, nor any indication as to what might have happened to the family. But outside, upon a sloping hill, beyond the creaking catch sheets of the waterstill, were 3 fresh graves, dug in the yield of white ash. And whoever made those graves had left no names upon the head markers, but a tiny, simple pieces of white cloth bearing the image of a snake pierced by a sword. The whole of Valois was abandoned, its contents left where they were. No one wanted to touch anything from that hole, not even the Gilder Aslo. He knelt beside the bubbling crop in the slime pit and instinctively ran his finger into the sticky green mess. At least a crop such as this had to be worth something after all. His tongue licked at the thick, sticky stuff. He spat and grimaced. It tasted of blood. The tale of Bulgurg. Some time ago, the most famous pit fighter in all of the Underhive was Bulgurg. Bulgurg was the strongest and most massive fighter of all. His girth and weight was so great that a hoist was used to lift him in and out of the fighting pits. In all his fights, he was never defeated, not even when pitted against savage mutants or teams of hardened criminals. Bulgurg's master was a hunchback gilder called Anano. This man had a whole string of pit fighters and made his living by staging spectacular contests between his fighters and any who dared to challenge him. Anano was very rich on the profits reaped from the pit. Despite the enormous wealth earned by Bulgurg and the other pit fighters, Anano remained a twisted, mean-spirited and miserly master. He spent as little as possible in his stable and kept his slaves in the most sorry conditions. Bulgurg was the only slave he made any effort to look after, keeping the giant contented with promises of freedom, which he never meant to honour. One day, another slave of Anno, a she-fighter called Hort, was badly hurt in a contest against a captive mutant, a scaled lizardman from the Downhive. Although Hort beat the monster and won Anano his purse, the Gilder refused to send for a surgeon to attend to her wounds. The she-fighter sickened, and after 3 days died, though all swore her injuries were not fatal. Some suspected that Anano had deliberately let his slave die, if not out of meanness, then out of some petty spite, for it was common knowledge that Hort had mocked him for his crooked back and twisted face. This incident is said to have triggered Bulgurg's revolt, the greatest slave uprising the Underhive has ever known. With the help of an enslaved techno called Bus, the rebels freed hundreds of their brethren. The slaves marched upon the trade post at Dust Falls, looting and burning the outholes on their approach. They set fire to the settlement and drove its people into the wastes, where many were attacked and killed by mutants and outlaws. From the ruins of Dust Falls, the slave army headed towards Dead End Pass, where Bulgurg led a determined attack upon the settlement's huge walls. Bulgurg reasoned that with control of Dead End Pass, he would possess a fortress that could resist the strongest forces the Gilders could muster. The people of Dead End Pass put up a stiff fight, but the slaves were too tough and relentless for them. Bulgurg had led his pit fighters into the settlement and captured the trade post. The slaves ran Dead End Pass for many months. Its people became accustomed to their new rulers, and even the guilders were forced to come and do business there. Now he had control of the fortified settlement. Bulgorg levied tolls on all traffic between Dead End Pass and the rest of the hive. Inside Dead End Pass, slavery was abolished. Slave trains passing through were freed. The guilders were obliged to hire free men to carry their wares into and out of Dead End. Things might have continued indefinitely. Bulgorg ran the settlement humanely and wisely. He used the tolls to improve the lot of the settlement's poorer citizens, digging new and better holes, building new water stills, and strengthening the town's defences. But the guilders would never tolerate the situation for long. They hated the pit fighter for defying them and for the devastation of their property at Dusk Falls. It was treachery that opened the gates of Dead End Pass while the settlement slept. It was no ordinary army that the guilders launched upon their foe, but a horde of criminals and outlaw gangs recruited from all over the Underhive. Mercenaries and cutthroats paid with guilder money and armed with guilder guns. The army ran amok in the streets, looting and killing indiscriminately, burning and destroying as it pleased them. The streets at Dead End Pass ran red with blood. Bulgorg's men made a last stand around the trade post, but it was too late for anything but a token resistance. When the killing was over and the survivors struggled back to their homes, many wept to find their families murdered or maimed. Few people at Dead End Pass were left to thank their liberators, nor were there many to compare the brutality of the Gildan army with the benign reign of Bulgorg. Those former slaves who still lived were executed without exception. The slave army was destroyed, and a great display of severed heads was made upon the battlements of Dead End Pass. Rows of stakes were erected on all waste roads, bearing gruesome trophies so that all who approached could consider the rebels' fate. Bulgorg was taken prisoner. He was hauled out of the settlement he had once ruled, past the rows of severed heads on a journey that would take him to all the major settlements of the Underhive. For a month, he was paraded around, chained and muzzled, goaded with power mauls, and fed upon the slops of the guilders' dogs. Finally, he was taken into the trading post at Dusk Falls and executed like a common criminal. His head was stuck upon the gate as a dire warning to all who dared challenge the power of the Merchant Guild. But still, the guilders could not lay Bulgorg's ghost to rest, nor erase forever the memory of his life, nor dispel the dream of freedom that he had awakened. To those who toil in the yokes of the slave trains, to guild slaves and house slaves, and most of all, to the pit fighters, Bulgorg is still the hero who humbled the Merchant Guild and proved it could be beaten. The death of Marius Halmer. In the time of Marius Halmer, more than 350 years before the birth of Gerontius, a stranger appeared in the Underhive settlement of Glory Hole. His pale, hairless skin and thin, whispering voice marked him at once as from House Delac. The stranger, who gave his name as Avarice, spent freely in the drinking dens and trading post, always pressing his companions for tales of the local gangs. At first, people were suspicious of the wealthy stranger, but soon they became used to seeing him about, and he was accepted as just another down-hive loner passing through. One day, some weeks after Avarice's arrival, Glory Hole was visited by the Karg gang. The news passed from hole to hole. Karg's in town. His men are down by Ryland's trade post, and Karg is heading for Hagen's place. Dogbig Karg was the toughest gang leader out of Glory Hole. His gang was known and feared from Two Tunnels to Dusk Falls. Now he had returned after spending almost a year down Hive. The word was 2 of the gang were dead. The tall youngster Gund, and old Ironhead, Karg's right-hand man. In Hagen's hole, as Hagen called his bar and hangout, Avarice and Karg talked. Hagen, a good friend to the old gang leader, poured some drinks and left the bottle on the table. As he left, the hole had cleared when Karg walked in. A nod and a quick word had seen to that, scattering nearly 100 souls into the street. A few displaced men, too curious for their own good, hung around outside or found unexpected business in the workshop across the road. For an hour or more, the two men talked and drank. At last, Karg stood up calling for Hagen and another bottle of Wild Snake. Taking the bottle with him, Karg left the drinking hole, heading towards Ryland's trade post. Hagen, who had opened his doors for Karg, now found himself surrounded by a small crowd. When he turned back, the man called Avarice was gone, leaving his glass untouched on the table. The next morning, the Karg gang left Glory Hole, heading out towards the White Waste. Avarice was nowhere to be found, though no one saw him leave and none of the gate guard recalled letting him through. Weeks passed without any news of Karg. Other gangs came and went. Outlaws raided Olog's Waterstill and killed Loth, his youngest son. Hagen blamed Ratskin renegades and promised a bottle of second best for every scalp brought in. Soon he had a dozen scalps nailed over his bar counter. On the whole, things were quiet. It was a small-time gilder called Milo who brought the news of Lord Marius Halmer's death. Apparently 2 of old Halmer's sons had been killed too, though no one was sure when or how this had happened. Marius's younger brother, Tiberius, was the new Lord Halmer. Some were saying Halmer's third son, Caterus, had fled Downhive with his family, and Tiberius was planning on sending bounty hunters after him. But that wasn't the news that shook Glory Hole. Halmer hadn't died in his bed as might be expected, nor had he fallen to sickness, poison, or spellcraft, though these are all common enough causes of death in the Imperial family. Somehow an assassin had got past the traps and guardian power fields through the adamantine doors with their psychic locks and into the inner sanctum. Halmer had fought like a demon. Only after a fierce fight did he fall to the ground, his powerful hands clasped around the throat of his killer in a mutual embrace of death. That, so they say, is how they found Marius Halmer and Dogbit Karg. On hides. The depths of the Underhive give way to the collapsed and compacted ruins of the hive bottom, the hive's ancient foundation layer, long since abandoned and forgotten by its inhabitants. This is a domain of stagnant darkness, where poison fumes rise from the putrid sump lake at the hive's bottom and choke the labyrinth of crude crawl holes and ruinous caverns. Here in the darkness dwell things spawned in the toxic waste of millennia, creatures that hide from even the pallid lights of the Underhive. Sometimes they crawl from their holes, slithering up from the blackness, driven by their hunger, perhaps for human flesh and blood. They can be glimpsed from the watchtowers of downtown, moving through the spoil heaps as they hunt the mutant rats that feed upon the refuse there. Their eyes can be seen glimmering amongst the ruins as they study the progress of a slave train, watching for stragglers and wounded. Throughout the Underhive, they can be heard howling and snarling in the dark hours of lights out, always close by, yet always unseen, a sound to haunt the sleep of men. Occasionally, a hunter or an ore prospector might bring in a pelt of some strange bestial thing. Some of them are men, or were, with scabrous rotting skin and talon-like tails, eyes vestigial and covered with white membranes, or black and staring without visible irises. Others have only the sham of human form, scaly and vile things with dripping maws of pointing teeth and long red tongues. Over the walls of downtown trade halls, there are nailed the skins of many such beasts, hundreds and hundreds of them, some rotten and eaten away by time or infestation, others gleaming with green and golden scales, a few of the skins of savages and outlaws brought in for bounty. Lothar Hex. Death stalked the labyrinthine tunnels of downtown. The settlement's inhabitants waited for the discovery of the next murder. Entire holes had been wiped out in the atrocities, guilders and respected gang leaders amongst them. The assassin was unknown. The only clues to his identity were the small white, mnemonic cards left upon each corpse. The cards displayed a manic death's head, which cackled and winked knowingly to the touch. As the death toll rose, so did unrest in the settlement. Neighbours turned upon neighbours, and everywhere there was an air of distrust. Wild Jews roamed the empty tunnels, breaking into holes to steal or simply to hide from the dark. The guilders doubled the watchman's rate, but there were few volunteers prepared to walk the streets at night. Lothar Hex, the Widowmaker, his head tilted at a slight angle, listened intently to the voices below. He had reached a dark void above his target, an empty conduit above the hideout of Gideon Drexler. Looking down into the room, Lothar's cold eyes focused upon the slumped figure of downtown's most feared gang leader. Empty bottles of Wild Snake littered the table and the floor around. From his jacket, Lothar took a long, flexible periscope, which he pushed carefully into the ceiling grill. Rotating the device, he counted 4 guards. Satisfied that these were the room's only occupants, he retrieved the scope and slowly began to remove the magno bolts from the grill cover. The grill tumbled to the floor with a clatter, and Lothar Hex dropped into the room, bolt guns blazing. 2 guards exploded before the assassin's feet had even touched the floor. Their torn bodies tossed across the room like ragdolls. The remaining guards fumbled for their weapons, firing wildly at the shadow-like figure as it sprang upon them. One collapsed in wide-eyed terror as Lothar's dagger found his throat. The last was slammed against the wall, his body jerking like a puppet as a dozen bolt shells exploded within his chest. Lothar Hex walked towards Drexler, his smoking guns held carelessly by his side. The gang leader glared in drunken astonishment, too numb with terror to move from his chair. The sight that met his eyes was more horrific than anything he had seen in a lifetime of Underhive fighting. The assassin's face seemed to blur and shift. Flesh, bones and sinew liquefied and reshaped. The human face disappeared, and the face that studied him so coldly was a mask of bestial evil. "What are you?" gasped Drexler, his voice shaking with terror. A grin played upon the inconsistent features, and the creature laughed maliciously. "I am darkness," it replied. "I am the darkness inside you all." A single bolt shot rang out, and Drexler span from his chair as the shell struck him square between the eyes. The force of the blast carried the body across the floor where it struck the far wall and slivered to the floor. The explosive bolts had erupted inside the gang leader's head, smattering bits of bone and brain upon the wall. The creature observed the scene of carnage. Its features were human once more. Lothar Hex took 5 mnemonic cards from his coat pocket and placed one upon each corpse. As his fingers touched them, the death's head upon the cards began to cackle and wink cheerfully. When he had done, the assassin took the cord from his coat and attached a small magno hook to one end. He threw it upwards through the open grill and tugged the line to make sure the hook was fast. He looked around the room. His work was finished now, for Drexler had been the final name on Sliding Jack's list. Lothar Hex could return to his master now and report complete success. The Hydra. Call me Crookneck, the outcast, only survivor, may the gods forgive me, of that ill-fated slime drifter Hydra. It seems now a lifetime ago since we set out upon the toxic sump deep in the black heart of the hive to hunt the savage raft spiders of the underworld. Their eyes, diamonds of purest white, shot with crimson, were much prized by the masters of the hive. We churned across the many-hued effluent, where violent swells released gaseous flaming balls that rose into the overhead caverns and lit our path. The captain, Hagen Volgotha, had not left his cabin since we set forth, but we heard in the silence of dog-watch heavy footfalls from within. Many days passed before we spied our first brood, their grey bodies skimming the filthy depths in the distance. At the sound of our cries, he walked onto the greasy deck, his presence filling us with dread. Valgotha, a giant of a man, hair red as blood, face a tissue of scars, dressed in black but for the gleaming white spider fang that made his right leg. He glared at each of us in turn, black, soulless eyes glinting in the half-light, and with a scream of triumph, he held above his head a diamond of exquisite beauty, a diamond that was to be our doom. Men of Hydra, he said. Men of Hydra, in my hand I hold the key to a life of riches, a life beyond your wildest dreams. This crystal will give you everything. Never again to feel the beast of work at your back. Never again to feel the pain of an empty belly. Never again an empty bottle. For this diamond the very lords of Halmere will fall at your feet, and all I ask in return is the hide of one spider. But my lads, a very particular spider. We hung on his every word, mouths open, eyes wide as he spoke. A beast I speak of is white. Yes, she's the last of the white mares of Varin. And oh, by the god, she's big. She'll cast a shadow on your souls, a dark shadow. The thing is covered with the scars of rat-skin harpoons, yet no man has put her under. I myself came close once, but she took my leg. I, in return, took a fang and a bauble. He held towards us the diamond, tempting each man with its glittering surface. Some say this was a fair exchange. I say not. I want to ride. So mark my words and mark them well. At that he drew himself to his full height, cruel fire burning in his eyes, and said, "Are you with me?" To a man, we would have followed him to the gates of hell and back, so fired up were we by this thunder. The Ratskins ran frantically about the deck, harpoon guns at the ready, while we lowered our gas skiffs onto the poisoned sump lake. Meanwhile, Valgotha urged us on with curses and threats from the deck of the Hydra, as one by one, our engines roaring, we sped towards our prey, leaving plumes of oily smoke in our wake. My harpooner, Skylar, a leathery rat, stood ready at the skiff's prow, his gun held high, face and bare torso covered in spider kill marks. Then we were upon them. The spider whelps we ignored, the grazing stallions we hit unmercifully. They fought back savagely, but we'd attacked at full speed and with complete surprise. Harpoon shots rang out, blades honed to a lethal razor's edge pierced the upper hide of the spiders' backs with ease. Their yellow blood oozed freely and mixed with the putrid slime of the lake. I brought the skiff about, engines throttling back, and stopped beside our first kill. Skylar jumped onto its lifeless carcass and crawled towards the beast's head. Drawing his knife, he prized free the creature's eyes, all the while chanting a rat-skin prayer to the spirits of the underworld. Then, with one deft blow, he punctured the spider's venom sac and drank deeply from the fountain of violet poison. To any other, one drop of this fluid meant a slow and agonising death, but these spider hunters of many generations had built up an immunity. Rather than kill them, it filled the ratskins with indescribable ecstasy. Precious stones meant nothing to this man. The venom was his reward, and he wanted more. Having made fast the kill, Skylar directed us towards the next target. Gunning the gas converter to full power, we carried on the hunt. Skips sped about the enraged creatures as one by one they were harpooned and slain. Death had come swiftly. Death had been absolute. We killed them all. Each skiff towed the floating corpses of many spiders. Ratmen, gorged on venom, stood erect at the front of each small craft, eyes glowing violet as they chanted prayers to invisible spirits.
You gotta.
Weighed down by our catch, I turned the skiff and slowly approached the Hydra. It was then that the mare spiders struck from the depths. Piercing screams burst from the rearmost craft. I turned and saw a skiff tossed into the air. Its
Yawn. Yawn.
Its two crewmen hit the murky lake. Corrosive fluids burned and ate their flesh. Before we knew it, 5 skiffs were gone, ripped to pieces by the spiders, or ruptured and dissolved in the hellish sumpwater. Regaining our senses, we cut free our catches and engaged in a fight to the death with the fell creatures. Skylar fought like a devil. Each harpoon hit its mark as I drove the skiff in manic circles around the deadly mares. My heart lifted. We seemed to redress the balance as our remaining crew fought desperately for their lives. Then, as if by miracle, spiders drew off. We watched exhausted as their huge grey backs ploughed away through the woolly surface. But our newfound hope was short-lived. At about 500 yards to starboard, they turned to face us. 10 to 12 mighty mare spiders, their innumerable eyes burning with hatred, studied us with evil intent. I heard Skylar and the other ratskins bless their harpoons in readiness, but the spiders did not attack again. Instead, almost imperceptibly at first, they started to wail. I tell you, this sound will be with me to my grave. I tried in vain to shut it out by jamming my hands over my ears, but it was no use. I felt my head would burst, the pitch was so intense. Then, by God, it came. I had seen many things on my voyages through the underworld of the Hive Bottom, countless abominations that defy description, but this was beyond all reason. A white mare spider, a mountain of pale flesh, legs like the pistons of some great engine, albino eyes, red with the fires of hell, bore down upon us, its wide mouth revealing rows of dread white fangs dripping venom. To a man, we screamed at the sight of this awful creature. Skylar threw down his harpoon and fell to his knees in terror as the thing hit us head on. I jerked into action and swung my craft around, fired the engine and headed towards the Hydra. I could hear above the engines the cries of my doomed companions as I left them behind. The Hydra lay before me. I was nearly there when my skiff lurched in the wake of the great beast as it passed me. I was not its target. The Hydra sat 100 tons in the sump lake, but the spider hit the slime drifter head on again and again and again. At first I thought the Hydra would hold, but then with a sickening yaw, she began to list as the spider pulled itself out of the scum. Its forelegs sprawled across the deck. It was only now the full horror of the thing was revealed. Its back was covered with hundreds of scars and broken harpoons, while great pulsing veins traced its massive underbelly where, to my utter dismay, hundreds of her offspring clung tightly to folds in the creature's skin. Above the bedlam, I heard him, Hagen Volgotha, screaming vile curses at this loathsome adversary. He wielded a harpoon and rushed forward in a frenzied attack, stabbing wildly at the beast's pulsating flesh. For one mad moment, I thought he would prevail, but then she struck and caught him. She held him fast by her 2 wicked mandibles, pushing him relentlessly towards that fang-lined moor, while he screamed insanely, still stabbing at her head with the harpoon. Then the horrific vision was lost from sight as the Hydra, with its malignant passenger, plunged beneath the livid, toxic surface, leaving behind a boiling turmoil of multi-hued bubbles. Then the wailing stopped and the surface slowly settled, and all fell silent. I sat rigid at the skiff's controls, the small craft bobbing gently on the swell. Skylar had come to his senses and keenly scanned the filthy lake, his harpoon gun clutched tightly in his hands. Suddenly, a white spider leg broke the surface and knocked him from his feet. He made no sound as he vanished beneath the surface. Days later, I was picked up by an Orlok drifter. They thought I'd gone mad, and many weeks passed before I came out of my delirium. The captain of that vessel, an honest man, found the diamonds in my skiff and held them for me. I recounted my tale to him before we made landfall, and gave him a handful of crystals as we said farewell. Then, a few days afterwards, standing upon a lonely promontory, I threw the remaining diamonds back into the slime from whence they came. The blood of my companions had stained their beauty forever. Now, as I tell you this, many years have passed. Poverty has been my constant companion, loneliness my bride, and never, in a waking hour, have I set eyes upon evil water of the underworld. But I tell you, when I can stay awake no longer, she comes back to haunt my dreams, that awful creature gliding gently across the livid slime, her body shining brightly in the gloom. To, as Volgotha decreed, lay her dark shadow on my soul. Thanks for watching, everybody. People asked me to do Necromunda stuff, so I've done some. I've got the old Necromunda rulebook from the original version and gone through and found the best little short stories that it had in there. Hopefully you've enjoyed these. If you would like to subscribe to the channel if you're not already, please do. Also remember to hit the bell if you are subscribed, so you stay up to date with what I'm posting up. Also, if you wouldn't mind liking this, that would really help. If you would like to support the channel and the stuff I do here, please consider using the links below. You can become a channel member or a supporter on Patreon, like these good fellows have here that you'll see above. And thank you to all of you guys who do support me. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much. But yeah, please like the video, and yeah, more again soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
Your fate will be decided by the great serpent.
The Great War against Chaos. Over the ages, the old world has known many wars and endured innumerable perils. The fragile kingdoms of humanity have met and defeated each threat. Yet every new danger that emerges is greater than the last, and every battle is won at an ever-increasing cost. Of all these wars, one alone is known as the Great War. The Great War against Chaos. Throughout the summer of the Imperial year 2301, dire portents of disaster were observed all across the lands of the Empire. Wells that had previously served towns for generations filled with noxious slime. Cattle succumbed to virulent pox and died. Crops shriveled in the unending heat or were eaten by plagues of insects. Few doubted that the Empire lay under a curse, for who but the Lord of Plagues, the foulest of Chaos gods, Nurgle himself, could be responsible for such woe.
Cartoons.
It seemed as if the four great gods of Chaos had, for once, put aside their timeless rivalry and united in common purpose. The power of Chaos had grown over the last few years. That much was certain. In the north, beastmen had multiplied and become bolder, emerging from the forests to repossess the lands that men called Osland and Ostermark. There was no centralized authority to oppose them, for the line of emperors had long since ended, and the lands of the Empire were divided between the ruling elector counts. Chaos warrior bands roamed as far as the Howling Hills to the north of Uldorf. Weird hordes of orcs, driven from their refuges by the growing power of Chaos, plundered the land unchecked. In the far north, the gateway that divided the worlds swelled with power. The dark shadow of Chaos spilled southwards, engulfing the wastelands and absorbing them into the realm of Chaos. Before this irresistible tide, the minions of Chaos advanced, and as the shadow moved south, so the forces of Chaos grew. Monsters from the northern wastes were joined by bands of chaos warriors from the borders of the Troll Country.
No one's buffed these. Okay.
In the deep forests of the Empire, beastmen assembled and readied themselves for war. Between the Middle Mountains and the High Pass to the north of Prague, there emerged an unholy horde, ready to do the bidding of the Chaos Gods. As autumn came, the
Apparently
lands
my
of
new
the
controller
Empire
already has
fell into anarchy. Many thousands died of hunger. Thousands more sought refuge in the crowded cities. Farms, villages, and small towns were abandoned to marauding bands of beastmen,
Oh, nice.
chaos
Good little
warriors, and
chunk.
common bandits. Even in the prosperous Reichland region around Nuln and Aldor, things were not well. Beastmen roamed the Reichwald forest, and many ships were attacked and burned as they travelled along the River Reich.
Oh,
In the
let's get to the
streets of the
cash first.
cities, fanatics and prophets of doom preached their strange brand of redemption. Many desperate citizens listened, and, believing the world to be an end, joined the bands of flagellants and world-weary apocalypse. Witchcraft and the foul gods of chaos were blamed for the sorry state of affairs. As a result, many innocents were burned at the stake or drowned, but doubtless many secret worshippers and other agents of chaos were rooted out and slain by the zealots. The Chaos Horde continued to gather from the lands around the Troll Country. It was to be the largest army ever to have marched to war in the old world. Some numbered it 100,000 strong, whilst others put the figure 2 or 3 times higher. In Kislev, the most northerly of the human realms, the Tsar sent southwards for help, foreseeing the moment when the horde would move upon him. The message reached Wolvenberg, where the Count of Oslan still held out, though the lands around had long since been ravaged by beastmen. The Count held the gods of chaos amongst his most bitter foes, and he responded immediately. Inside a week, he led his army northwards to join that of the Tsar. Meanwhile, the Empire continued to devolve into anarchy. Chaos sorcerers emerged from hiding and led bands of deluded followers in an attempt to take over local government. Some men, those driven to the edge of madness by starvation and bloodshed, openly recognized the might of chaos and swore allegiance to the dark gods. Witch hunters and preachers rallied the people against the followers of chaos, and there was open warfare in the streets. In Nuln, the preacher Magnus drew a great following, and with his mixture of zeal and common sense, the city was finally purged of the worshippers of the dark gods. As winter settled in the Northlands, the army of chaos began its long march south. The Count of Osland and the entire Kislevite army moved northwards to meet them. The two gigantic forces clashed
How does he
somewhere
get
between
past
the
there?
Kislevite towns of Murmograd and Shazek. Few survived the battle to report the defeat to Oslan and Kislev. The Chaos Horde laid waste to the northern part of the Tsar's territory before moving southwards along the foothills of the World's Edge Mountains. The massive army crossed the frozen Linsk in the spring. The very last of the Kislevite regular troops were caught from front and rear and destroyed as they defended the bridges. Beyond the links lay the heartlands of Kislev and the great city of Prague. In Prague, the people prepared for attack. Thousands flooded into the city from the surrounding countryside, bringing with them what livestock they could salvage. It was not enough, for soon the brave citizens were starving, and in their weakened condition, many succumbed to the heinous visitations of Nurgle. The brave Kislevites planted what crops they could within the city walls. Outside the city's defenses, the Chaos Horde made camp. From here, the attackers launched occasional forays, but made no attempt to seize the city until the pestilence had done its work. The people of Prague survived attack after attack, hoping beyond hope that a relieving force would be sent. Rumor of a heroic new leader from the south reached the defenders, a man called Magnus, who was bringing an army north to their salvation. Indeed, the flock of Magnus of Nuln grew ever stronger. He gathered an army of all kinds of men, of loyal devotees of Sigmar, weird, mad-eyed zealots, ordinary citizens who hated chaos, and professional soldiers from the armies of the provinces. Recognizing in Magnus a leader they could all follow, the Elector Counts of the Empire pledged their support and led their troops to join them. Soon a vast army marched, but their progress was slow, and with every passing day, the people of Prague grew weaker and had faded in their hearts. Eventually, after a bitter battle within the streets of the city, Prague fell in the summer of 2302. The power of chaos swept over the land. Magnus was too late. An advanced force of cavalry lay but a day's march from the city, but it was all to no avail. Chaos had triumphed. With the fall of Prague, a great black wind blew from the realm of chaos. Out of the Chaos Gateway it roared, over to the Troll Country and into northern Kislev. Through the streets of Prague it howled and screamed. Where the wind blew, the realm of chaos followed, absorbing the lands of men. The streets of Prague bowed under its blast. Men and stone twisted and became as one. Living things melted and reformed within the very fabric of the city. Souls in imprisoned torment cried out from the twisted stones of the city. Distorted faces appeared from the walls. Agonized limbs writhed from the pavements. Pillars groaned with voices that had once belonged to living flesh. Prague had become a nightmare incarnate. A taste of what lay ahead for the old world under the rule of the Chaos Gods. A few managed to escape the ruin of Prague, slipping through the siege lines as the Chaos armies mounted their final assault. They brought the news of Prague's fall to Kislev, where the Tsar was hastily training his new army. When Magnus of Nuln heard of the defeat, it was said he wept tears of blood and swore before Sigmar to avenge the horrors done that day. After the fall of Prague, the Chaos Horde moved southwards, passing Magnus's advance force without realizing they had done so. These cavalry soon reached the stricken city of Prague, where the warriors, many of them Kislevites themselves, witnessed the horror that had overtaken its people. They did not stay, but moved quickly south in pursuit of the Chaos Horde. They soon encountered and destroyed the rear guard of the Chaos Army. Stragglers and slackers for the most part, beastmen who had squabbled with their rivals and had been left behind. The human warriors fell upon the evil force with ferocity spawned of outrage. It was a minor victory, but a victory nonetheless. Meanwhile, the main body of the Chaos Horde continued its advance towards Kislev, knowing nothing of the human army that was now behind it. At the same time as Magnus's cavalry headed for Prague, the main Empire army and Magnus himself made for Kislev. Though this force still hoped to reach Prague, it sorely needed provisions in order to continue. Magnus hoped to acquire these together with fresh troops before moving northwards. As it happened, he arrived at Kislev just in time to see the Chaos Horde surround the city. The army arrayed around the walls of Kislev, its black banners fluttering from the hills around. The standards of all four Chaos Gods could be seen where their champions were encamped. Chaos warriors and knights stood in serried ranks, waiting to advance. Sorcerers stood behind them or rode amongst the troops upon beasts of indescribably foul appearance. Beastmen massed noisily around the banners of their own lords, braying and bellowing in their excitement. Above the reeking crowd towered massive things with broad, ugly heads, but whether these were mortal creatures or demons, it was impossible to say. The battle was ever afterwards called the Battle at the Gates of Kislev. Within the city, the Tsar ordered the defences and took command of his new army. Hastily trained and ill-equipped, yet with courage born of desperation, the Kislevites prepared to meet the Chaos assault. With them were many dwarves from the great seat of Everpeak, the dwarf city of Karaz-Akarak. Despite continuous unrest in the dwarf's own mountain realm, a contingent of dwarves had come to the Tsar's aid. These doughty warriors were to bear the brunt of the fighting during the initial assault, and without doubt, it was their stolid determination which saved the city from ruin. In the first Chaos attack, the Dark Gods committed the Beastmen. Following a furious assault, the foul creatures drove the Kislevites from their hastily constructed outer defenses. The Kislevites withdrew behind the city walls. The last to reach the safety of the city were the dwarves, whose valiant rearguard action had held the Beastmen at bay. As the Chaos Lords prepared to lead the second assault upon the city, Magnus's army reached the outskirts of the Chaos encampment. The Empire troops immediately set about the few Chaos followers there, and the main Chaos force quickly learned of this new threat to its rear. With great haste, the Chaos army divided into two, one part of the horde continuing to assault the city, whilst the other turned to attack Magnus. Magnus's blow fell like a righteous hammer. Before the Chaos army could properly regroup, he attacked, routing a large contingent of beastmen who had only just retired from the front. The creatures despaired when they saw the human army and put up little resistance before they turned and fled. Magnus's army pushed deep into the Chaos army. Thousands of Chaos troops were slaughtered, and the Chaos force could do nothing to halt the pace of Magnus's furious advance. But the forces of Chaos were still great. Though Magnus had driven off many thousands of troops, many more thousands remained. Caught off guard by the sudden attack from its rear, the Chaos army took time to redeploy, but eventually, its greater numbers began to tell. The advance of the Empire army was halted, and Magnus found himself surrounded. The Empire army fell back into a defensive circle. All this was observed from the city walls. At first, the Kislevites sent up a great cheer as they saw the Chaos troops fleeing in all directions. Later, the cheering turned to silence as the Empire army seemed to stumble. Fearing their saviors would be destroyed before their eyes, the dwarves attempted to break out and help Magnus. 300 dwarves sped from the south gate and hurled themselves upon their tormentors. But the Chaos troops surrounding Kislev were too many and too well led, and the dwarves were beaten back with heavy losses. Of the gallant 300 who left Kislev, barely half returned. With the threat from Magnus contained, the Chaos forces turned their attention towards Kislev once more. As the Chaos forces massed, it became apparent to the defenders that the next assault was intended to carry the city. The best Chaos troops were arrayed against them. Demons, warriors of Chaos, sorcerers upon huge warriors, and dragon ogres. Huge and powerful creatures woken by the storm of Chaos. The Kislevites and dwarves prepared for the final assault with little hope, but great courage. It was as the Chaos army prepared to attack that the fortunes of the Allies took a sudden and dramatic turn. Magnus's advance force of cavalry, the same from which he reached Prague too late to save the city, arrived upon the northern flank of the Chaos army. The cavalry were mainly drawn from the Empire, but there were also many native Kislevites, and the memory of what they had seen in Prague
I wish I could give
was
them
still
discounts
fresh
after these.
in their mind.
You know.
With tremendous
You walked out
ferocity,
past them.
the cavalry plunged into the Chaos Army, which began to crumble before their implacable anger. Magnus and his main army had drawn up into a low hill, where it endured the constant attack of beastmen and chaos warriors. From his position, he saw the sudden confusion in the rear ranks of the Chaos Horde and realized that his own cavalry had returned from the north. The Chaos troops heard the confusion behind them and began to waver. Summoning the last of his strength, Magnus spurred his troops to the attack. Meanwhile, in the city, the defenders witnessed a cavalry attack upon the assembled hordes of chaos and saw the dark forces begin to turn. The city gates were flung open, and the Kislevites rushed out and attacked their besiegers. The dwarves saw a great oath of vengeance and launched themselves upon the Chaos Army, hewing with their great axes as they yelled their Khazalid battle cries. Caught from three sides, the Chaos Horde fell into confusion. Beastmen milled about, running hither and thither, and were impossible to draw into order. Chaos warriors fought on regardless, but their numbers were too few to fight on all fronts. Slowly, the Chaos Army disintegrated. Warbands fled before the fury of the human army, and many were caught and destroyed as they did so. By the day's end, the Chaos Horde was broken and scattered. Many thousands lay dead. Following the battle at the gates of Kislev, the power of chaos ebbed away. The demons melted back into the realm of chaos, and darkness withdrew from the land once more. The city of Prague was leveled and rebuilt, though ever afterwards it has remained a haunted city, where the dead sleep uneasily. Magnus the Pious, as he was known from then on, became emperor and united the empire again. The forests were cleared of beastmen, and the last of Ostland and Ostermark was freed from their grip. The forces of chaos were confined to the Troll Country and beyond. The Great War of Chaos was at an end. The alliance of the Chaos Gods ended too. Their rivalries drove them apart once more. Perhaps the Dark Gods were content to test the defenses of mankind, for their true plans are hard to fathom. For 200 years since that time, the forces of chaos have been gathering strength in the wasteland. Within the Empire, the followers of chaos have begun again their secret work of infiltration and destruction. Everywhere, chaos prepares for the next attempt to wrest control of the old world from its mortal lords. Thanks for watching, everybody. Just a little bit of nostalgia for the good old days of fantasy. Although I guess Total War's keeping the dream alive. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing if you're not subscribed.
Thank you, guys.
Also, if you'd like to help the channel out, please consider using the links below, like this noble gathering of heroes have on the screen right now. And thank you all to you guys. Really appreciate your support. And yeah.
Thanks to Arbiter Prince for all these audio books and stories to listen to while we play this card shop game, getting all these extra bits. Please go, if you like Warhammer and like audiobooks, just go subscribe to them, go listen to their stories real quick. It's a nice little thing to play in the background while you play this little sim game. Especially since I can't play freaking Space Marine 2 because my computer is a potato. Thanks for coming. Y'all have a good day. I'll see y'all in the next